Our next guest is a member of the National Assembly. He represents the people of Molo constituency. And then in the National Assembly, he chairs a very, very important committee, the Committee on Finance and Planning. The Honorable Kuria Kimani. Happy New Year, brother. You haven't been here since last year. Can you imagine?
Yeah, I've been a minute. I think the last time I was here, I gave you a good morning, everyone. The last time I was here, I gave you the good news of we've just completed a working study tour in several states in the US. And when I met Kenyans in diaspora there, they said they actually wake up very early to listen to Spice FM. So, and I remember people are very excited when I told you that. But that is really true. This is the Situation Room is program that's listened globally. Most of the Kenyans in diaspora, when they want to catch very objective news and watch interesting debates of what's happening back home, they certainly tune into Spice FM Situation Room.
What also excites us is knowing that even those in positions of leadership, policy in various levels, legislation are listening. Those in policy, including State House, are listening. And so when Kenyans speak, those who are making policy are hearing what Kenyans want.
Yeah, and also you also do very objective reporting. You know, during a time when there is a sort of sensationalization of news and propaganda, there is one place. There are a few places left that you can go to and get the news, and this is one of those places.
Very good. Now, Mheshimiwa, a lot is happening in the public conversations. Recently, the Affordable Housing Bill has been processed by Parliament. And this is, of course, in response to what started as the housing levy. It was it tax before, then it became levy? Was it just fund, then became tax, then became levy? Whatever it is, the deduction and the matters that have been prosecuted in court and the status that then said, no, we need a framework to manage this money that's collected through this. Yesterday, we saw this advisory from the Attorney General to the Kenya Revenue Authority, and basically just telling them, at present, what has come out of court is what stands until you have a legal framework in place to manage the money. What is the status of that?
Latiff, I don't know really why the communique by the Attorney General is becoming all over news, because the court pronounced themselves, I think, around 26th of January, about the collection of a housing levy. So what happened is Kenya Revenue Authority and National Treasury had applied for stay orders for them to continue collecting the housing levy until the case is fully heard and determined. And those stay orders were rejected by both, I think, the High Court and the Court of Appeal. And therefore, this matter has, in January, there was no collection of housing levy by KRA, and KRA did not even enforce or collection of that housing levy. We are in the month of February. Most employers are already preparing the payrolls for this month, and nobody has been asked to really remit the housing levy, because this administration is an administration that respects the rule of law. So what happened after the issue of housing levy was challenged in court? We got to study as a legislative arm of government that ruling and find out what are the courts saying, because the Constitution, its wisdom, gives us the three arms of government and gives duties and responsibilities to these three arms of government that are distinct and clear cut. So the legislative arm of government, where I sit, we make laws. The executive implements them, and the judiciary interprets them. So we studied that interpretation and said the housing levy was unconstitutional for two reasons. One, they said it was discriminatory because it was targeting employed people only, and it was not targeting the unemployed people. And then secondly, they said that there was lack of a legislative framework, because once you look at the establishment of all the other levies and all the other funds, they are actually established under an act of parliament, whether it's a road maintenance levy, whether it is a catering levy. You know, every time you eat at a restaurant, there's a percentage of it, I think it's 3%, that goes to catering levy, that's supposed to go into training training of people in that profession. Every time you buy fuel, there's a percentage of it that goes to road levy. The other funds like the railway development levy. So all these funds are actually established under an act of parliament.
Yep.
So what therefore parliament did was to go back to the drawing board and find how do we make sure that we have now a piece of legislation that will pass the test of judicial litigation. And that's when the Leader of Majority Party tabled, I think last December, the Affordable Housing Bill. Again, when it was tabled and we advertised for public participation, again, we got another challenge by the court saying you cannot conduct public participation in a manner that was advertised then in the papers. Why? Because usually the way Parliament carries out its public participation, we put out an ad in the papers and say, if you have any views on this particular bill, send email or deliver hard copies or send by post office your views to these addresses. And again, some people challenged that in court and said that people like are marginalized, people with living disabilities, and then will not have a chance to participate in this lawmaking process because of the way it was done. And therefore, again, through the leadership of the committee myself, because this was done by the Joint Committee of Finance and National Planning and the Committee of Housing, Urban Planning and Public Works. So we came to the drawing board and asked, so how do we make sure there is sufficient public participation that doesn't seem to that it will be we listen to as many views as possible, and we take it as close to people as possible. So we sampled 29 counties out of the 8 previous provincial administration, and we did now public hearings. We went, in fact, we were like common, like they were like barazas.
Yeah.
We went to Narok, we went to Homa Bay, we went to Mombasa, we went to Lamu, we went to Kilifi, we went to Nakuru, we went to Baringo, we went to Nyandarua, we went to Embu, we went to Kirinyaga, we went to Turkana, we went to Isiolo, and we went to Wajir. We sampled all those counties. We went and said, people, this is a law that's proposed. What are your views? And Kenyans are very informed people, and they gave us very, very interesting views. First of all, the bill required that for you to be accorded an affordable house, and you had to make 10% deposit. And they said, for example, for social housing, that are targeting those people that have an income of less than 20,000 shillings, they said, I can't afford 10%. And what is the criteria in asking somebody who is buying a social house, who is earning an income of less than 20,000 shillings, depositing a 10%, and another one who is buying a 6 million house at Park Road, again paying similar 10%. And so part of the recommendations that we proposed to Parliament, to National Assembly, and I'm glad that the plenary agreed with us, was deletion of that clause that required a deposit of 10%. Another question came.
So what do you replace it with? If you delete it, then
so the percent, the deposit that will be required to be paid will be made in subsequently regulations, depending on the project. So, for example, if it is the houses that are targeting people who are earning like more than 10,000 shillings, then you can have a deposit. But if it's social housing, then even in practice, when you're moving houses, you pay a deposit of that 1 month and then the 1 month equivalent. So we let that to subsequent regulations so that they can be made according to the 3 types of housing units. Another thing that came up was the need for institutional housing, something that had not been captured by the bill. One of the greatest challenges where our TVET, our KMTC, and our university students are facing is decent accommodation for students. If you go around every university, there's a slum next to it. You go to Kenyatta University, there's a slum called KM. You go to University of Nairobi, there's another one. You go to Egerton University, there's another. An example, the Technical University of Nairobi, which sits in the middle of the city, has around 20,000 students, but only 408 accommodation units in the campus, which means you have tens of thousands of students who do not have an income, trying to find a place to live in the city. And you can imagine if getting decent, affordable housing, even for rent, for employed Kenyans, is difficult. Now, think about students staying in the same city. So one of the recommendations is that we did, and I'm happy that National Assembly agreed with us, is even changing the definition of what affordable housing is to include institutional housing, and now to include that the fund will be required to allocate resources for construction of institutional housing units, especially for our universities, for our TVETs, and for KMTC, for Kenya Defence Forces, and for police officers, because that is the other challenge. If you go to places like the northeastern part of this country, it's very difficult to have teachers stay on the job because there's no decent housing. You go to places like Turkana and all these other places, one of the biggest sources of insecurity in those places is because even the security agents that are sent there do not have decent housing. That's why they are bombarded all the time by the bandits. So we now introduce a phrase, we now introduce a clause that expressly provides that the affordable housing will have to include institutional housing. The other big debate that Kenyans were really asking is, what is the relationship between my contributing to this and my owning? So, what does it mean that Eric gets to be deducted 1.5% of his pay?
Yeah.
Goes to the affordable housing fund. That money is used to build a house that someone who has a business that even earns him almost the same amount of income like you do, but is not contributing to the fund and gets to own the house. And one of the recommendations that we made, and that was passed at the third at the committee of the whole house, and subsequently now in the third reading, was to require even the informal sector to pay the 1.5% housing levy. So that the catch here is, when you're doing application for the house, the requirement before was that you had to be 18 years old and you have a KRA pin. But these houses are not for free, okay? And I think Kenyans really need to understand that what government is trying to do here is to bridge in the demand gap. But it doesn't mean that you're going to be under this house for free. You're going to buy it. So if you're buying, you certainly have an income. And so it would be very unfair that someone who is earning 30,000 shillings a month gets to pay 1.5% of that, that's around 450 shillings, as housing levy, and someone who has a gross income of the same amount, 30,000 shillings, doesn't get to pay to the housing fund, but gets to benefit.
They qualify.
They qualify. So we added an additional qualification that said that for you now to qualify for the affordable housing programs, you must be tax compliant. So there is now need to provide a tax compliance certificate,
which is
so
proof
that
you contributed to the fund.
Has to, in addition to the other taxes that you have been contributing to the fund. Lastly, the way the bill was initially was providing for this amount of money is going to the State Department, is going to National House Corporation, is going to this. But then this going to institutional housing. But then we thought there will be a time when we will have built enough houses that we don't have to build them anymore. So what we set up is a revolving fund. So when these monies are collected by the Kenya Revenue Authority, they go to the affordable housing fund. Okay, then this fund is run by a board, and one of the things that we did was tighten the qualification of the board. One of the things that was interesting initially, the bill was saying that the CEO would have to have experience in the built environment. And as people were asking, so my foreman can be the CEO, of this huge fund. So we tightened it up, requiring them to have at least a bachelor's degree, to have experience in the built environment, to be a member of these professions, whether it's legal or built environment or economics or accounting, something like that. But most importantly, have very stiff penalties on misappropriation of those funds, because what you've seen do in Muga and Latiff for a very long time is we have not had a deliberate effort to protect public funds from misappropriation. We have not had stiff penalties that discourages people from misappropriating funds. We've seen people who have, say, been prosecuted for misappropriating, say, 1 billion shillings of public funds, and they're let out with a fine of 5 million. Come on, if I would be asked, if I was given $1 billion shillings and told my fine is 10, even if I was told to go to jail for 1 month,
you'll go.
Boss, alafu kuja urudi uko na kabilioni kako, si utaenda jela hiyo mwaka moja, alafu urudi upate kabi kako happily ever after.
Mheshimiwa, I've got to ask this question. So are there people who said no to the entire concept of a contributory housing levy?
Of course, there were. We had varied views. So maybe before we got that, so what we did, we set up a penalty for misappropriation of these funds, and we made it twice the amount of money you misappropriate. And that is the first time that we have any legislation now doing that. So that if you misappropriate 5 million, then you pay double of it. If you misappropriate 1 billion, then you pay double it. On the question of are there people who said no, yes. There are people who said no, we do not want it to contribute, we want it to be voluntary. There are people who said we do not want to contribute as the salaried people, and the non-salaried are not contributing. We want to have a tie to that. When I'm contributing, then I need to have to be guaranteed, to at least have a surety that the people who are benefiting from this program are the ones who are contributing. A lot of people living with disabilities came and said, for example, one of the biggest challenges you have in the commercial housing units that are available in the market is that very few of them are built in a way that are accessible to people living with disabilities. So you find that if you take a typical apartment, the way that the toilets are done, the way the kitchen are done, very few of them are cognizant of people with disabilities. And now we say that in both the construction and the allocation of these affordable housing units, then there must be consideration of youth, women, marginalized people, and people living with disabilities in both the allocation and the design of these houses. And also, it's good to note when you're doing a piece of legislation, and I saw this confusion even when it came to the floor of the House for debate. When a bill comes to the floor of the House, during what's called the Committee of the Whole House, any member can raise in their place and make amendments.
Yeah.
And I think Kenyans need to understand this. Voting on a bill, apart from at the end of it all, when we call during the third reading, where there is a global yea or nay, but for the rest of the process, it is voted clause by clause. What does clause 2 say? What does clause 3 say? What does this? And then if you feel that, for example, 1.5% is too little or too high, then you can say, now, let's increase it to 2.
Propose an amendment.
Yeah, propose an amendment. And then if you're able to convince the House and other members of Parliament, then that this is exactly agreeable, then you debate and you convince the others, and they're going to vote for it.
So,
and one of the things that...
So the question is...
Sorry.
The Joint Parliamentary Committee on Finance and that of Housing, when you went around all those public hearings, you would say that a majority of the people who appeared before you did not have a problem with the concept of a housing levy.
Certainly.
So it's only a minority who said absolute no.
Yeah.
In its entirety. Yes,
the majority of people, and we have these submissions in our report, that out of the around each meeting we had around at least 500 people. 500 times 29, that's around 1,500 people. Yeah. So out of the 1,500 people that appeared before us, and around 600 memoranda that we received from the members of the public, 80% of them I said that we have a housing problem in this country that we need to fix, and they recommended amendments to the law that they felt would have tightened the law and made it more accessible to Kenyans and cheaper to Kenyans, and ensure fairness and the things that we've talked about. For example, capturing people with disabilities. The issue of employment, by the way, also came up, and people are saying, fine, what guarantees us in this, for example, came from, I remember this in Lamu. What guarantees us that when this project is done, it is not, the way cost of people speak. Si nyinyi watu wa bara mtakuja mfanye hizi kazi. Tutahakikisha kwamba hizi kazi ni zetu sisi wa coast ndio tunataka kufanya hizi kazi. Si nyinyi mtoke kule bara mkuje mfanye hizi kazi. And now what we did we proposed amendments to the bill that were adopted by the House was now requiring as much as possible to have employment of local labor and sourcing materials locally from that community, so that we have a ripple down, we have a triple effect on not just where these projects are done, it's not just the houses that are built, but the labor,
the local economy is also impacted,
and the building units, or not the raw materials, are actually got from that.
I hear you when you talk about doing public participation and all of that. Voices from 500 people from give or take 20 counties. What happens to the voices that you hear after the fact, the voices after your report, or even voices maybe that you didn't capture, who have genuine concerns, and then look to people who are their representatives, and then having to ask the question, what balance do you create when you're representing your people, but then you're also paying allegiance to your party, which we cannot run away from as a reality either?
Wow. So one of the things that we certainly do when we are listening to the members of parliament, and I keep telling this to my committee members, we go there with an open mind. In majority of the time, like I dare say, if you check the affordable housing bill that has been taken to the Senate, and you compare with the affordable housing bill that came from the executive, there are fundamental changes. There are actually a total of 49 clauses that we have either amended or added new clauses. Because public participation enriches the legislation process. And for example, the things that I mentioned, they all came from the public. We didn't have a revolving fund before. Now, with the proposed amendments from the people, now we have a revolving fund. And what a revolving fund therefore means is that with time, because look at it this way, we're charging this levy, putting it into a pool of funds. Then we're using the model is a county or public or county or national government identifies public land and sets aside for affordable housing. And the essence of doing this on public land is again to reduce the cost of land, because one of the reasons why houses have remained unaffordable is the cost of land. So if the land is free and the money you're using to construct these houses is taxpayers' money, and then these houses are not free, they are for sale. So we have two sources of revenue for this fund. There's a levy that builds these houses, but then when you take these houses, then there is money that is paid for these houses. So that means that this is going to be one of the largest funds we have in the country. Because remember, all the other funds that you have, whether it's a catering fund, you charge the fund, you expense, the money is depleted. This is like initial seed capital. You put into the housing projects, you take those houses, you recoup that money back into the fund. That means in the next several years, then you might actually not have to levy again, because now you'll have created an enough pool of resources that is sufficient to continue with bridging the housing agenda in the country. Secondly, what this program by government has done, it has signaled the market into finding more efficient ways of providing affordable housing to the public. And you've seen a lot of private developers now coming up and saying this is affordable housing program, and you've seen market prices of houses going low. In 2018, a two-bed apartment in Kileleshwa or Lavington would cost you no less than 17 million shillings. Now, every day now, you pass around Kileleshwa and Lavington, you see ads of apartments, two-bedroom apartments going for 5 million, for 6 million shillings that are built by the private sector. So the signaling that Kenya is going to, that we have a 200,000 units deficit of housing units in the country, and the government is coming to bridge in and saying it has sent a signaling effect to the private sector that are now coming into this investment. And therefore, I'm seeing in the long run, the government will not have again to engage in this and this program. We have just to be self-financing, and now let the private sector continue with it. In fact, part of the provisions that we've provided, Schedule 3 on this bill was who are going to be the implementing agencies, and one of the implementing agencies now there has been stipulated as the private sector. A lot of Kenyans are also asking, why not allocate appropriate money from the national budget and do this affordable housing units? And that is a very genuine, really concern by Kenyans. But Latiff, let me tell you, out of the 10 shillings that we collect as revenue, out of 10 shillings that KRA collects every day, 7 of those shillings goes to pay national debt. 7 out of 10 goes to pay national. In fact, it is 6.7 shillings. So you have left with 3.3 shillings for development and for recurrent expenditures. Out of that, 2 shillings is for recurrent. It's for paying salary of civil servants, for sending books for primary school children, for maintaining our police service, for maintaining our armies and all that. So we are left with hardly a shilling for development. That would mean that we probably take another 50 years for us to have the kind of resources that are needed to bridge the 200,000 housing units deficit we have in this republic.
Much more, I have an issue with Parliament, though.
Okay.
And my big problem with Parliament is, what I would, without fear of contradiction, say is failure. When the issue of housing bill was being discussed, it was a public debate before the Finance Act, before the finance bill even went into proper debate in the House. This issue of finance bill was being discussed. And one of the things that I remember even the PS Hinga saying is, we will not start collecting money from this housing until we have regulations in place, until we have a framework for managing these monies in place. One would expect that would be obvious to members of Parliament, particularly those sitting in the Finance Committee or the Budget Committee, because if you are collecting money for specific needs, you have got to ring-fence that money so that it doesn't go to pay salaries and buy mandazi. You failed us because you approved the levy without approving or demanding that a framework comes first before you approve a levy.
Okay.
And it had to take a Kenyan to go to court to raise this matter, among others, for Parliament to see, oh, yes, my God, yeah.
There's some loopholes here.
We were supposed to have done this.
Yes, Latiff, I knew that we needed to create an additional legal framework. And part of the remedy that we did, as we waited to create time now to bring that legislative framework, was, again, if you check the finance bill as it came to Parliament and the Finance Act, there's a big difference on section, if I'm right, section 34A and B, that we said previously it was there's going to be a 3%, actually it was 3% housing levy, 3% employer, 3% employee. We reduced it to 1.5% employer, 1.5% employee. But most importantly, and remember, this amendment was brought by the MP for Machakos, which, as the chair of the committee, I agreed to, and we supported in the House, and it was approved. We said that these monies will only be spent for the purpose of affordable housing and proper sanitation and the required infrastructure. That is in the Finance Act. And what that amendment did, it singled out the housing levy from the other taxes that are proposed by the Finance Act to the framework that existed before this annulling by the court. Was KRA collects it, it is put in a special account at Central Bank of Kenya, only for the purpose of which is stipulated in the Finance Act. Construction, offtake of affordable housing units and the required infrastructure, including roads and sanitation.
Was that
provision
was that sufficient?
Is there. On whether it's sufficient or not is a subject of court of legal interpretation.
No, in your opinion.
In my opinion,
that clause there that
in
says
opinion,
this money doesn't even go, it goes to the central bank and it can only be used to build houses. But it does not tell the central bank or the controller of budget how to make sure that this money is actually going to build houses. If a minister, if we abolished the Ministry of Housing and the Department for Housing was under something else called Environment, and someone in the Ministry of Environment came and said, we are building houses for KFS officers, would the controller of budget have said, no, I cannot approve this withdrawal? Because the word housing would have been there,
at that
and
time,
sanitation would have been there.
At that time, Latiff, that was sufficient to the judgment of the committee members, the judgment of National Assembly, to the judgment of all our legal teams, and the thinking that national members of Parliament work by themselves.
Mheshimiwa, you just started this conversation this morning by saying, actually, we have experience as Parliament. We have a petroleum development levy. There's a law. We have, which other levies did you talk about?
The road maintenance levy.
Yes, road maintenance levy. There's a law to manage it. We have this catering levy. There's a law to manage it. You had experience knowing for us to establish this catering levy, we need to anchor it in law. But you're telling us that your experience came and told you that no, we don't need a law for this one.
No.
We just need a clause for this one.
Gentlemen and lady, knowledge is something that gets to evolve. You get to learn something today and you improve that you're learning tomorrow. And the thinking that particular time was that was sufficient, and that will buy us time to bring the legislative framework, which started drafting immediately. And that is why, even before the annulling of this by the court, because the final annulling was done at the end of January, we stopped collecting in 1st of January. The Affordable Housing Bill was tabled last year. So even when we said this will suffice for now, but we got to have a legislative framework, and we sent our drafters on their toes to start. Now, can we have now that legislative proposal to be brought before
So what was
Parliament?
the agency?
And it came.
In the end, practically, this program will begin from around May, June. Yes?
What was the agency?
What was the agency? Why couldn't you, first of all, bring the housing bill and then bring the affordable housing levy in the next financial year?
We have now, for example, at least 210 housing units being done in 196 constituencies across the country.
Has our money been used on that?
Yes.
Has the housing levy been used?
That is a housing levy that is a housing levy.
So this money is already being used?
Of course, yes. Once two things happen.
You don't see a problem there, Mheshimiwa.
What's the problem?
You are using the money illegally.
How?
The money shouldn't have been collected in the first place. If everything that ought to have been done was done, I find this puzzling. You have a good thing, and then you know what needs to be done. It is not done. And then everything is supposed to follow. Now, look at the bad press you get. Look at the baggage that comes with it. All unnecessary. And yet all this could have been done simply by doing what was needed to be done in the first place.
Muga, I dare tell you that any time there has always been a revolutionary idea and change, it is never welcome. And that is the nature of human being. Even if we took a year or two, when you want to introduce something new, it is not welcome. Some of the programs that you've seen, let's talk about the National Social Protection Fund, the re-engineering of NHIF. We've had a lot of debate about it. We are questioning it. And of course, it has been challenged in court. When it gets to work, then people are saying, oh, okay, I think this was a good thing. When the Social Protection Fund for elderly people was started in this country, there was out of saying, why are we giving people money for free? Why are we giving these elderly people money for free? Talk about the new constitution, a very, very progressive document. We were split in the middle as a country. Devolution. We were told devolution is Majimboism. And by the way, it is Majimboism. Majimboism then.
It was demonized.
Majimboism then, especially people from my community who were told it is Majimbo, and Majimbo is associating with the right honorable Raila Odinga, was a terrible thing. So,
power grab.
If we have something that we are saying now, we are really celebrating a very progressive constitution. But during that constitutional moment, we were split right in the middle.
But
And you know what we did not do?
Yes.
We did not introduce a constitution through the back door.
No.
We followed due process.
What have we introduced in the back door?
This levy
How is it in the back door?
without a legal framework.
I mean, surely, Mheshimiwa.
Why
Okay.
is the law following the money?
Let's
It's-
ask the question right now because we keep going back and forth. It's a yes or no. Is there a legal framework for the implementation of the housing levy today? It's either there or it's not.
We have, how do you call it? We have a vote for it at the State Department of Housing. The money is ring-fenced in terms of you cannot, the control of budget cannot approve those monies for payment of salaries or for nothing else apart from what is pronounced in the Finance Act and what is pronounced in the Appropriations Act. Because the Appropriations Act created a specific vote for this particular purpose. And, gentlemen and lady, this information is progressive now. And the role of the independent arms of government, because if the courts did not pronounce themselves on this particular matter, we would not be having this conversation. The program will be ongoing. And that is why, in the wisdom of the Constitution, because no particular institution is said to have the island of knowledge, that you do this work, legislation, you execute as the executive, judiciary interpret. And you've had judicial interpretations even on our Constitution over and over and over again. So, an example, if you the oldest constitution of this world is the Constitution of the United States of America.
So the answer
And
is
yet they
no,
still-
Mheshimiwa, that there's no legal framework. What there is a plan in order to institute a legal framework after the fact. And I think that we can just agree on, isn't it? So that has come later. And so the question continues to be, when we talk about representation from Parliament of the people, which is in many cases first charge, what guarantee do you give to Kenyans futurely that it is their interests that you represent first, as opposed to the interests of the executive for which heads your party? And we cannot say that, call it perception, call it optics, but it plays very squarely in this conversation, and we cannot run away from that futurely, because this, many would say, they've thrown up their arms, it's a done deal, and they cannot run away from the power that you wield in Parliament or to whom you are beholden. So what guarantees, and I'm really, really concerned about this, what guarantees do you give to Kenyans that truly it is their interests? The Kenyans who are crying today about not being able to afford school fees, the Kenyans who are crying today that they cannot afford a meal, the Kenyans who are crying that they paid power bills and they can't get power, they paid power installation fees and they can't get power. The Kenyans who go to hospital tomorrow and cannot get medicine. And here we are saying, take a little bit more from Kenyans and build houses for them. Okay. Mheshimiwa, how do you say tomorrow that truly you will represent the needs of people? I feel like crying because Kenyans are asking that question. And here we are talking about building houses and Kenyans are wondering, do you really know? Do you really know where I am? That's what Kenyans are asking today.
No. The issue of loyalty between the loyalty to the people and loyalty to the party, and I think that is the most critical question that you've asked. We went to campaign to the people, and you have a choice to choose a political party. And Kenyans elect not just the individual, but they elect your political vehicle. And if you doubt it, tell me any UDA member of parliament that was elected in, say, Nyanza region, where Raila Odinga got the highest number of votes. Or tell me someone who got elected on an ODM ticket, even when there were those candidates, where President William Ruto and Deputy President Gachagua led in the number of votes. The reality of politics and political parties is true, because I went to the same car, to the same rally with President Ruto and Deputy President Gachagua and said that we have a plan of how to do affordable housing units in this country. The people that were campaigning on the other side as Azimio went on that platform. And therefore, even though you are required to exercise your oversight roles, the truth is political realities of your political party, you have to take in consideration of that. And let me give an example. The position I hold as the chair of Finance Committee of the National Assembly is not an Azimio position, and that is a reality.
It's a Kenya Kwanza position.
It is a Kenya Kwanza position. And therefore, I am mandated by my party to execute also my party's manifesto. And that is what you'll have a choice to choose in the next election. Because unlike say the judiciary or some especially the judiciary arm of government, the executive, especially the presidency and the members of parliament, every 5 years we go back to the people.
And you're answerable.
And I'm answerable. So I'll be answerable. In 2017, I was elected on a Jubilee ticket. I went back and said, elect me back on this is what we agreed to do. Did we do it? Even 2027, I'll go back to my people. And they will have a chance to choose. Did I do what I promised them to do?
Let me tell you
something. And that is the power of the democracy of the Republic of Kenya.
I agree to a great extent. But then, your job, even in this political formation, is to make sure that things are done the right way.
Yes.
Okay? That's the job you're given. The job of the president is to make sure the country is run the right way. The job of the member of parliament is to make sure that the president is running the country the right way. That's the job that you have.
Yeah.
And when you feel that the president is cutting corners, it is your job to stop him in his tracks and tell him, you are cutting corners and this is not lawful. So when you approve a fund and you don't have a framework for it, you're failing in your job. This is not the Kenya Kwanza, this is not all those things. It is your job to make sure that Kenya Kwanza delivers on its campaign promise, but following due process. It's your job to make sure that public participation happens properly. It's your job to make sure that if you come up with a new legislative framework, it shall be done in accordance with the law. It's your job to make sure that the executive does not go on a borrowing spree without answering to parliament, or on a spending spree without answering to parliament. You can't come and tell us, you see, Kenya Kwanza promised, if, let's say, Azimio had won, and Raila was the president, and he had promised 6,000, you can't tell us that MPs would have sat down and say, Raila anataka pesa ngapi? 6,000, alisema, wache iende. It was their job, plus you would be in that parliament today, to make sure that due process is followed in the expenditure of this money. This is what we're having an issue with. It's parliament. If parliament does not tell the executive, no, we shall follow due process and not political expedience.
Let me give an example of what happened because I was in the last parliament, and I'll compare that to what is happening now. I've given an example. I don't know why you are all not
remembering.
You're conveniently forgetting.
Remind us the example.
Out of the affordable housing bill, for example. Let me start with the finance bill. The finance bill that was tabled in Parliament, and that is in the Finance Act, has had 110 amendments. Those amendments are not brought by the executive. This affordable housing bill, is fundamentally different in terms of its structure from what was brought by the executive. I have just told you that we have 49 new amendments and new clauses on this bill. That was not done by the executive. Next week, for example, we've received a petition from one of the members of parliament on the loans that are given to border people. You know, you have a creditor, a businessman or company comes and says, I'm going to give you a border, you're going to pay 200 shillings a month, 200 shillings a day, and then you sign. By the time we are completing to pay for that bike, you've paid 350,000 shillings.
Yes,
more than twice.
Thrice even.
More than thrice the amount of money. And interestingly, just when you're about to complete, ukichelewa na siku ngapi, your bike is taken. Some of those people, instead of now the business of lending, they are in the business of selling the bikes
And collecting them.
to Kenyans and collecting them.
And
what we're doing as a Committee of Finance and National Assembly from next week is we're going to get to the middle of it and make sure that those loans that are given to boda riders, for example, must adhere to interest rates, and they must adhere to a particular law, and we must make sure that those boda people are protected.
Can I say something?
Is that the work executive? No,
Okay.
that is the independent role of National Assembly,
Mheshimiwa,
and the initiative of
final
the Chair of the
comment,
Finance
City.
National.
You know,
Time is
Mheshimiwa,
up.
we actually agree with everything you're saying. We may not seem to remember or understand certain things, but neither do you. Our point of difference is not what you're saying. It is on process and procedure and the right thing to do. That's it. Everything else you say we agree with.
We'll do better.
Yes.
Do the right thing the right way.
We'll do better.
All the time.
Mheshimiwa Kuria Kimani, we always love it when you come here. He's a member of parliament for Molo constituency, chairman of the very crucial Finance and Planning Committee of the National Assembly. He's been our guest this hour. Thank you very much for tuning in and for all the comments everywhere on social media. We'll be back tomorrow.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.